Welcome to Long Island Talks with me, Mace in your face, and Dr. Jean. And our special guest today is Phil Schoppman, who's a law enforcement official, and he's also the coordinator for peer support team that is run by the Union for the Police Department. He's a trainer and past chair for the Walk for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and a current chair for the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Long Island. He holds several trainer certifications for different organizations, as well as the director of peer facilitation for a nonprofit organization providing peer support on a national level for law enforcement. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're very welcome.
Welcome, Phil. So happy to see you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, by the way, Jean, I'll bet you thought I forgot last week.
I don't want a banana now. I want an apple.
For a banana
I want an
last
apple.
week.
You
I
eat the
brought
banana.
You a banana, and I even have some
You have the
napkins
apple?
for you.
I want an apple.
I'll bet all our viewers want to watch you eat the banana. Let's go back to our guest.
We'll leave it here.
Thank you. Yes, we'll leave it right there. Okay.
So,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
tell us what you do.
So I'm in a unique position that I work midnights, so I have most of my day available. Now I do have a family, but my family's usually at school or work. So what I'm able to do is I'm able to utilize my time during the day to be a part of many different organizations. When I became a police officer, I was first a police officer in New York City, and I immediately started doing peer support in that department. I have a twin brother who was a police officer. He was doing peer support already, and with 24 to 34,000 police officers, it wasn't unnatural that every single day that I did some type of peer support, there was somebody who reached out to us saying that they were struggling with something. So right off the bat, I was immediately thrown into kind of helping people with crisis and thoughts of suicide. So what I started to do was I started to realize that I needed more skills because I'm not a mental health professional and I don't pretend to be. So what I did was I started taking classes and trainings, and then ultimately, unbeknownst to myself, what ultimately happened was I became a trainer in several programs and started working with several organizations here in New York State to help both law enforcement and then regular civilians and anybody who's struggling.
And you actually do a lot of training of peer counselors for the post-tour processing. I know you want to say something about that. It's a new program, and the police are really long overdue in having that. Yeah,
so some departments have a peer support program. Some departments have an EAP, an employee assistance program, but there are some departments in the nation that have nothing. So we recently spoke to an officer who said that they have about a dozen officers that cover their department, but they cover, I think it was something ridiculous like 70 square miles, and that they actually never see each other. And because of that scenario, they have no peer support team. So about a year ago to a year and a half ago, I was approached by Dr. Robin Canariato,
Yes.
a wonderfully beautiful woman. She had come up with this idea a long time ago that police officers at the beginning of your tour, especially in the NYPD, you are brought into the precinct and you're at an inspection where the sergeants and the lieutenants will make sure you're wearing your vest, make sure that you have your gun, make sure you know where you're going, and they kind of check in with you to make sure that you're okay, and then they tell you where to go, and then you go out and you spend your night. Basically, your whole day is made up of everybody's worst days. They never bring you in at the end to make sure that you're okay with what you saw and what you did. So Dr.
The end should be the most important,
Right.
and Robin Canariato started that program. It's now taken on across the country.
Yeah.
It's going to be international at some point.
Yeah, we have a lot of departments who are signing on, and basically it allows law enforcement officers from all across the nation to come on at any given time that there's a scheduled session and process kind of what they've seen and what they've done, knowing that sometimes, and I know what it feels like. I remember one time my wife was expecting and I had a call where there was a little baby involved, and I wanted to go home and I wanted to talk about it. But I didn't want to talk about it with her because I didn't want her knowing the danger I was in or what had happened with the baby, because we were having a baby. So I remember that day feeling like I had no one to speak to. Luckily for me, I do have a support system, and I have my brother who's a police officer who knows what I'm going through because he's gone through most of it himself.
That's great, with the two of you being your identical twins, right?
Identical twins. He could
So
be sitting here, you wouldn't know the difference.
You can
So how do we
literally
know
be
you're
in two
not him?
places at once.
I could be him, except for.
Do you have photo ID to prove it's you?
I do, and it wouldn't matter. He's just he's just as smart, and he's been doing this work too. He could sit here. You literally could take me out and put him in here. His heart. He literally is the kind of guy that would give you the shirt off his back. I've seen him literally take his shirt off and give it to somebody in need.
He's allowed to take his shirt off. I know they said one thing, that if somebody wants to tell if a John is a cop.
Okay.
What she has to do is tell him to take his clothes off. He's allowed to take his clothes off on the job, but he's not allowed to take his pants off. Is that true?
You know, I've never done undercover, so I don't know.
I heard that.
I have to ask the guys that do that.
Well, here's something. You know, because you see it on TV all the time, and I have friends that think it's true. You think there's an undercover cop. You go over and say, are you on the job? And, you know, people think they're mandated to say they are if they are. And I'm like, no, they're not.
We're absolutely allowed to lie. We're supposed to lie. That's why we call it being undercover.
Yes.
Yeah, so
But
otherwise we might as well just wear our badges.
I'm a divorce and family law attorney.
Yes.
And I've represent a lot of cops from the different counties going through divorces. And often they'll come to my office and talk to me about what happened that day or the day before on the street that was beyond horrendous. And when they're done, I'm like, oh my God, how do you deal with that? Almost every time they say, oh, because compared to being at home with my spouse, this is a picnic, a walk in the park.
and we make jokes about it, but this is, you know, the relationship issues is one of the things that we see a lot when we're doing the peer support for law enforcement. We see it with everybody, civilians. It doesn't matter who you are. So when we're doing a post-tour processing session, we'll actually hear somebody mentioning, you know, their supervisor, you know, yelled at them for something that they didn't do, and then they went home and their spouse isn't paying attention, and I mean, all of those things, and that's just one of the things that I get the great opportunity to be involved with, and that's why, like, I'm glad that you know Robin. I know Robin's a good friend of yours, but we have basically. I think of it as like a superhero team of all of these wonderful people who. I mean, I have 3 kids, I work full time, I'm part of different organizations, but we always make time to make sure that people have someone to reach out to, because that's, for us, that's the most important thing.
Someone who understands, someone who's been through the same experiences, because they don't necessarily want to bring it home to their family, and their other friends who aren't police often don't understand. And sometimes the general public looks at police negatively because they have the power, so they're afraid of them. So this is a way of talking to another person who's a cop or who has a lot of experience working with cops. And the good thing about it is, with trauma, if you can deal with it immediately and process it through, which is what post-tour processing is about, then it doesn't get stuck inside you to come out later, maybe when you suddenly reach for your gun and you shouldn't, or you're in a situation and you're frightened where you should be active, you know. They know right away if somebody needs further help.
I mean, I get the opportunity because I'm also the, like we mentioned, I'm the coordinator for the peer team for my police department. Our union is a wonderful union. They made the decision that we needed a peer team, so I was able to help them to develop that team. But one of the programs that we have is we get to go in and we talk to the recruits. And when we talk to the recruits, we talk about this specifically, that most of the time, you know, as a police officer, I'm still a human, obviously. So I might go to the scene and someone is really injured or someone's really upset, and we have emotions, but we're not allowed to really show those emotions.
Or you have a daughter, let's say a little girl, God forbid, was killed and she's 8 years old and you have an 8-year-old.
And I have an 8-year-old daughter,
What, you know, this affects any human being. If it didn't, you wouldn't be fit to be out there on the streets working with people. So this is a chance to process it.
But let's go to the lively subject of suicide. It seems to me that over the years, I hear much more about police suicide within the boroughs than Nassau or Suffolk. Is that because that's where the attention is, or it's just a part of what they deal with there compared to here, that it does happen there more?
Well, so in the nation itself, you have a lot of suicide. I think the latest stats was about 44,496 per year. For police suicide, it's no different because, like I said, once we take off the uniform, we're still human. But for us, there's two things here. We have all the added stressors that sometimes regular people don't have. But you have to remember, with New York City, it being the largest police department, you know, my department, let's say, has 2,200 officers at any given time, whereas the NYPD might have 36,000 this year. So with that, just the sheer numbers alone would mean that the incidence of suicide would be more prevalent because there's just a larger number of people. The other thing that we look at is the kind of the criteria for what the stats are for the sliver of the population that actually suicides more. You're looking at the male population, you're looking at a certain age. When you put all of those stats together and you look at, then if we were to push those to the side and we were to look at what makes up law enforcement, it's usually that sliver. Like, we don't have an 80-year-old cop. We don't have a 16-year-old cop. So basically what we do is when we look at society and the sliver that's the highest amount that's suiciding, that sliver is exactly where law enforcement lives. So so sometimes people will say, you know, the suicide rate is very high. Well, one of the reasons it's high is because of the accumulation of stress, the inability to process, you know, not having the support system, not, you know, if I were to walk outside right now in my uniform, there will be people who pass me who like me. If you had a great interaction with a police officer.
Most of us are glad you're there.
Yeah, but if you just got a ticket, then you don't like
different.
us. So you know, it's a weird dynamic that some of us live and work in the same communities. So when you go out, you don't know if you're going to run into somebody that doesn't like you. You don't know if people know who you are. So there's a lot of extra stress with it. So you might hear the level of suicide rates in the city simply because when you have 24,000 police officers and inside the law enforcement, it's made up of the worst of the worst for the stats, you're going to see higher numbers.
Is the marginal rate of suicide higher for cops than for population at large?
So one of the things, I've heard this in two ways. I've heard that it's slightly higher, and then I've heard other people who have spoken who've said, no, it's exactly the same, but simply because of the situation that I explained, it is the same. What it comes down to is I'm very weary about some of the stats, and the reason is, for example, when we talk about crime, there's a concept of the dark figure of crime. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. Basically, let's say there's some guy who wants to break into a building next to us, and a police officer drives by. He sees the police officer, he chooses not to do anything. You've now stopped a burglary, but no one knows that you stopped a burglary. There's no stat there. I can't go to my boss and say, hey, I stopped 5 crimes, that didn't happen today. When you talk about suicide, depending on what the programs are inside the department, depending on what the stigma is around the supervisors, how they talk about law enforcement. So I'm very weary about stats because each department is different, each state is different. New York State is one of the lowest states as far as suicide rates out of all 50 states. However, I know, because I'm part of the network, that we have an amazing amount of resources, an amazing amount of mental health professionals.
You have better benefits, you're reimbursed better. You know, I've heard terrible stories. I mean, there was one cop, this is common knowledge, in Massachusetts, and he was crippled for life by some family that had a lot of power in the town, and they protected his own family for a year, and then they sent them away to Tennessee. I think it was on one of the crime shows that the family had to run away, and he got $15,000 a year, and that was it for his lifetime injury. Now, luckily in New York and Nassau and Suffolk, the police are well compensated. So if God forbid they are disabled or something, they're taken care of, their family's taken care of, and that has a lot to do with it. You know, there's nothing like going out there and risking your life or being hurt and getting nothing or almost nothing in return.
And there's national organizations that look like the Concerns of Police Survivors, the Brotherhood of the Fallen. I mean, there's different organizations that, you know, guarding our dependents. There's a lot of organizations that will look out to be a support for police officers in those situations. But like you're saying, I don't know that they're there for, like, there's a Fraternal Order of Police, but I don't know that they're there for all places in all states. So a big part of this is, to get back to the question, I'm very weary about the stats because we also know that sometimes a suicide is not listed as a suicide. So when we talk about the dark figure of crime, I stopped a burglary, but no one knows I stopped a burglary. Sometimes there's a death, but it's not listed as a suicide.
Such as when the Clintons are a cause of suicide.
This is the political show? I didn't know this was the political show.
No, but I was waiting all day to make that joke.
A lot of people who are involved politically, so with high profile, and then it turns negative, a lot of times they wind up committing suicide, just like the witness the night before they're due to testify
Yes.
often commits suicide.
Yeah.
But the thing that people say about police is they have a vehicle for suicide right in their possession that you can't really always take away from them, because it's a tool. It's not a luxury item, and that's their gun. What do you say about that?
Well, so there was a study done, I think, for the Israeli Defense Police, Israeli Defense Force, where they did a pilot program where they had them take their guns and leave them at work before they went home. And that dropped the suicide rate down by like 60% or something ridiculous. It might even been higher.
But we can't do that in this country, because technically you're on 24/7 duty. If there's a robbery in the apartment above you, you have to go up there with your gun if needed, even if you're off duty.
You don't have to necessarily respond to that, because let's say I have my kids, I can't say, I'm sorry, my family is not safe. I have to, So sometimes when you're off duty and there's an incident, they tell you to kind of be a really good witness, or to defend life if you have to. But because we do carry off duty, and because of the amount of violence that does occur in New York State, doing something like that in New York State, the suicide rate might go down. I'll say why that's the case in a second. But suicide rate might go down, but the fact is then the amount of crime and the violence probably would go up in other places, because similar to those things where crime is stopped and we don't know about it, there are lots of incidents in New York State and New York City especially, where an off-duty police officer gets involved and stops something, but it's not newsworthy, so we don't hear about it. We also know, I was just going to say, so we know the latest stats say that in New York State, death by firearm is very high, but for this area, actually, literally the county that we're sitting in, hanging is the highest amount. So when we look at suicidality and suicide ideation, we do look at a risk assessment. One of the parts of that risk assessment is, do they have a plan? Is there lethal means? Do they have access to those means already? So yeah, me having my firearm on me already, if I have a plan and my plan is to use my firearm, then yeah, it's very, very dangerous, because my plan, I can follow through on my plan at any point. That's why the prevention piece is so important.
Except to me, I'm a licensed gun owner.
Yes.
I would never use a gun to kill myself, because to me, if you're going to, in my mind, it's not something I would do, but you kill yourself to be rid of pain and end existence. But there are so many situations where someone tried to kill themselves with a rifle, a shotgun, or even a handgun, and they didn't die. Half their face is blown off,
Yes.
they're crippled in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
And then, to me, it's like if I wanted to end everything, to do it in a way that I may be worse off than what I'm trying to escape. Just makes no sense. For me, I would never use the gun.
Yeah, so I'm not a mental health professional, but there's, I will say, and you know this, there's two parts of the brain. The part that you're using right now is the rational frontal part of the brain that makes decisions.
Did you hear that, people?
Yes.
I have a rational part of
does.
my brain.
I'm pretty sure if we scanned him, we would definitely figure that out. But there's another part of the brain that is based in emotion, and I have spoken to people who have said to me that a friend or a family member have given them that speech. Look, I was actually, me personally, I've been on a scene once where they were doing an intervention, and someone said, hey, if you jump from here, there's no guarantee that you're actually going to die. This wasn't my place, this is something else. If you jump from here, you don't know that you're going to die. You could just become a vegetable. And the person who was in that much pain and had experienced that much loss had said, well, me being a vegetable would be a better choice than the life I'm living right now. So when we talk about suicide, sometimes it's not about wanting to live or wanting to die. It's about not wanting to live the way that they're living. So even being a vegetable might be less pain than they're in. So that's why when we approach and we have discussions with someone who's having thoughts about suicide, what you say is very, very important. So the concept is there and the rationality is there, but sometimes we know because of alcohol or because of the emotional distress somebody's in, you might not be thinking rationally, which is why we see people with families and friends who they love still suiciding because you would think to yourself, well, if you have beautiful kids or if you have family and friends, why would you do this to them? But the fact is, you're in so much pain that other stuff doesn't really matter.
Well, you tell yourself something crazy like they'd be better off without me, because your mind is distorted. If your rational processes were working, even if the emotional processes in your brain were working, you wouldn't need the immediate intervention.
Yeah.
But the idea is that if we do the prevention, the post-war processing, the prevention, then you don't get to the point of crisis as easily, I would think, or you catch it faster.
Well,
if it does happen.
In some cases, there's a mental illness or a physiological, biological, component. So we might not be able to stop something if there is. But the other,
they screen for that. They do a heavy psychological. I can't tell you how many people have called myself and Robin asking for a psychological because they took the police psychological and failed it. And often they fail it because they're not quick enough to act and to do something, say, violent when they have to be violent to protect somebody. They're too gentle-minded, but then they could become very depressed if they're in a bad situation. But usually, eventually, if they want to be a police officer, they get to. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because when I was going through the processing to become a New York City police officer, I sat down with the psychologist and I was doing my psychology review. And when I was, 16 or 17, I was given a book by a wonderful friend about cognitive behavioral therapy. And in that book, they talk about processing your emotions and not creating stories. So most of my life, I've been able to control emotional distress because I don't make up a story that creates the emotional distress. So when I was actually processing to be a police officer, they asked me about how often I fight with my spouse. And her and I have been together for 14, 15 years. We don't usually fight. So they had
I won't get his money.
They had he's definitely not getting more money. But they had a problem with that because they said everybody fights. You have to get mad at people.
Wait a minute.
I almost didn't get the job.
I knew a bad story though. There was a police officer, and he said that he and his wife never fought.
Well, she did.
Wait a minute. What would happen is every time a situation would start intensifying where it looked like they were about to fight or she was about to stand up to him, let's put it that way, he would clean his gun.
Oh, okay.
Now, what do you say about that? I mean, he can't go to work with a dirty gun.
I'm not talking about bullying tactics or aggressive menacing. That would be illegal. But
of course it would be, but I mean, it's hard to prove that he's cleaning his gun in order to bully his wife into silence, but apparently, in his mind, that was the way you deal with
again, the way I look at it is whether you're a regular person or you have a badge, or we know that lawyers have a high incidence of stress. We know that dentists now, the dentist is actually one of the highest levels of
psychiatrists too.
So it doesn't matter what kind of uniform or clothes that you put on. Everybody's under a certain amount of stress. So if we can, the way we like to look at it is if we can super saturate the community with two types of people, then we have a better chance of making those rates go down. You have one type of person who can literally recognize that someone is struggling and is able, through the skill set, to get them to a mental health professional. And then the other type of person would be that mental health professional. So that's why, some of the organizations that I'm a part of, we try to get, anywhere to anyone at any time to give them that skill set, because being able to recognize that someone might be struggling is a skill. It's not a natural ability. You need to learn what it looks like.
It is, and they don't teach enough of that in early years. And one of the things we were talking about is that you and your colleagues have a wonderful program to go around to the schools with suicide prevention and ways to handle violence, ways to handle negative emotions. I'd love to hear something about that.
So I'm, again, and I say that it's an opportunity because it is an opportunity. I'm part of several different groups. I'll just mention them first. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is the largest nonprofit geared towards suicide prevention. They do advocacy, they do support. They here on Long Island, we run the third largest walk for suicide prevention. So I'm actually lucky enough to have chaired some of the walks in the past couple of years. I've been part of their committees to bring this suicide prevention training. So I'm one of the trainers with a woman named Deborah Caputo. she and I will go anywhere and do any one of the programs for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, because there's different programs about just having conversations about suicide. There's a program about called More Than Sad, which is kind of geared towards what you're talking about, where they'll go into schools for the younger children, and they'll talk about depression, anxiety, and suicide. There's a program for college-based years. So there's all of these programs for this organization that is kind of just there. All you have to do is ask. I'm also one of the co-chairs for the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Long Island, and basically this organization is just a group of individuals and a group of businesses that come together, and what we try to do is we try to eliminate suicides in our community. So one of the things that we'll do is we'll try to get into, when you look at suicide, there's prevention, which is to try to stop it before. There's intervention, which is the crisis is occurring now. And then there's postvention, which is after an incident. So the Suicide Prevention Coalition, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, both of these organizations are organizations that will go and try to bring resources to the community. I'm also part of one more group called the Tulips, which is
Tulips?
Tulips, yeah. So I was a firefighter, I'm an EMT, a police officer. I actually used to run a martial arts school for somebody, so I have 2 black belts. I have all of these things, but I absolutely love to say that I'm a tulip, because the amount of work that we've done with the Suicide Prevention Coalition and AFSP, we're a bunch of trainers that have gotten together, and we've just, in New York and outside of New York, we try to make the community that vision that we have where there's people out there that are paying attention. I liken it to a lifeguard that sits in a chair. The lifeguard doesn't jump in the water and swim to each person to make sure they're okay. They sit there and they pay attention, and when they see distress, that's when they act. And it's not their job to do surgery on the beach. You pull the person out of the water, you keep them alive, and then you hand them off to the professional, which would be the ambulance that brings them to the doctor. It's very similar to that with suicide prevention.
Well, that's what the police officer does, only he or she has the additional power of force. If the person doesn't want to go,
Yes.
you can take them anyway.
Yeah, the New York State mental hygiene law allows us, and again, people don't like police officers already, so when we come to the scene sometimes and we have to use force to bring someone to safety,
They get better real quick.
Or family members sometimes will get upset, sometimes they're glad that we're there, sometimes the person themselves, but the fact is, our job is to, people think that police work is customer service, but it's really about public safety. So if a person's going to injure themselves or another person, especially because one of the laws that we enforce is the mental hygiene law, under that section, we do have to take them to make sure that they're safe.
You call the crisis squad and you have them escorted to a hospital to be assessed, at least temporarily, and to get out of the situation that's immediate danger.
And we know with most crises, if you can get past a certain amount of time, the level of emotional distress might come down, which is kind of the thing that we look at when we do a suicide intervention. People are fluctuating with feelings of hopelessness and helplessness and worthlessness, and there's a lot of pain and loss, maybe a lot of change in their life. We know that when those feelings get really, really strong, we know that it can be transient, and if they can get past that moment, there's a really strong chance that they can actually take over again and start to regulate their emotions. But we would never do that by ourselves. That's why we always look at the crisis centers, mobile crisis teams, mental health professionals. It's, I would never, if your car wasn't working, I wouldn't pretend to be a mechanic and say, let's take apart the engine.
But police won't even change the tire, saying that they have more important things to do.
I've changed tires.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Well, you're a good one.
It depends. If there's a fire and there's people hanging out of the building, I might not be able to change your tire. But and again, it might be different in different places. But some of the people that I work with, my department is probably one of the most professionals I've ever seen, the way that they hold themselves. So we help people who get locked out.
All sorts of things. Get locked out,
locked out of their cars.
Oh, gosh. I'm
calling
calling you.
Yeah. I can't speak for all, but.
So the lifeguard analogy you made, lifeguard is in his big chair stand for the bigger view, and he sees someone going under, he sees someone flailing. What do you look for when looking at people in society as indicators?
So that's a great question. So what happens is sometimes, like after a suicide, somebody will say to me, oh, we didn't know that the person was thinking about suicide.
We didn't see the red flags, if there were any.
Then after speaking to each of the family members or friends, you can see that you basically had a whole puzzle in front of you. The picture was there, but maybe each person got one piece. So one of the things that we do is we break down those signs or signals
What are
into
some
categories.
of those signs or signals to look for?
So some of those signs are things that the person's saying, things that they're doing, and things that you see that they're experiencing. So for example, and again, this is not a complete list, we're just having a conversation here, but some of them are going to be very obvious, like giving away their possessions. So, I recently had heard of a story of someone who had put Post-it notes on all of the objects in their room with names for people that they wanted those objects to go to.
Ooh.
And a family member found the room, wasn't sure what it was, called out to a crisis center, and the crisis center was able to help them and say, look, we don't know what this is because we don't know what it is exactly. Let's find out. And that's really, when you see those signs and signals, asking is the most important. Well, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But so you have things that people are doing. It could be something as simple as they stop taking care of themselves. I spoke to somebody one time who said, Phil, I don't care about living anymore. Do you think I care about putting my makeup on or taking a shower or doing my hair? So if you notice that maybe somebody stopped taking care of themselves, we don't know for sure what that is, because I had a friend one time, she got pregnant, and she just stayed in the room for like a week, and I don't even know if she showered. It's not about jumping to saying, oh my gosh, because you didn't shower for 3 days, you must be thinking about suicide. The fact is, whatever sign or signal that you see, it might be an indication, and because it might be an indication, and we look into it. So you have things that people are doing, you have things that people are saying. So, when I think about the things that people say, sometimes it falls into two categories for me. It's literally the words that they're using. So they might say things like, I'm at the end of my rope, or I just want to go to sleep and never wake up, or I have to disappear, I don't want to be here anymore. Again, I don't know what that means. You don't want to be here anymore because you want to retire and move to another state, or you don't want to be here anymore and exist. So we don't know, so we kind of have to look into it. Another major one that we look for is also a change in mood. Oftentimes, you will know that your friend who's usually very happy becomes sad, and that's an indication to you that, there might be struggling there.
What about sometimes I've found the opposite? I mean,
Yes.
I'm sure it's true, like you could neglect your appearance, but you see somebody who's dressed perfectly with their makeup, you almost get the sense that they want to be a beautiful corpse.
Yeah.
Or you see somebody who was always unhappy.
Yes.
We had a patient once at a day program, and he kept saying, I should commit suicide. Should I do it? How should I do it? And this was like a regular group topic on his part. One day he started talking about something different. Should I be hospitalized? And a lot of people thought that he just, in a sense, had a new obsession, or maybe even that he was getting better. What happened was he then jumped in front of a train.
Yes.
Because he was now thinking that he needed that intervention, and people miss the signs. So the signs can be very subtle.
Yes.
That's why if you have any doubt, bring them to a professional. Don't try to deal with it or brush it off and say it's nothing.
But isn't there also times where once the person who just comes to terms with, that's it, I am now going to commit suicide, become very happy and euphoric,
Yes.
where
Yeah.
now they're actually taking care of themselves
Yes.
until that moment they have planned to do it, and being the greatest person to everyone?
So both of the situations that you've explained is exactly that. That's why when I was saying a change in mood, I wasn't just saying somebody who's happy who becomes sad. We're looking for a change in mood. So happy to sad or sad to happy. If I'm in a lot of pain and I think that I might be out of my pain, I might start to regulate my emotions, and now I'm happy. So it is counterintuitive to be sitting across from somebody at lunch and say, oh my gosh, you're so happy, are you thinking about killing yourself? But the fact is, if for that person, they've always been miserable. No, and we're not joking about suicide, but it's a silly situation to say, wait a minute, they're happy and that's what you're worried about? But if you're talking about somebody who's usually very miserable and very sad, that's exactly what we're talking about. It's there's a company called Living Works that's based out of Canada, and they use a term, instead of saying signs or signals, they use the term invitations.
Invitations?
Yeah. So when you see something that might be a sign or a signal that suicide is present, they get rid of the word sign or signal. They only use the word invitation because they want you to feel like this is an invitation to at least ask the person what's going on. Now, in this case here, maybe the medication started working, maybe they got a new job, maybe they got money, so maybe they're happy all of a sudden. We don't know because someone was miserable and now they're happy that they're going to kill themselves, but because they might be thinking about killing themselves.
There's nothing wrong in asking, oh gee, you seem to be feeling better, you know, what's going on?
So one of the things about suicide, having that talk about suicide and not that stigma that I can't talk about it, I don't want to make it worse, or what if I talk about it, I'm going to implant the idea. You can't implant the idea. What you need is, if this person is struggling, there's a part of them that doesn't want to live that way. That part wants to talk about it. So I'm not saying you have to jump and say, oh my gosh, this person's going to kill themselves, I need to ask about suicide. But certainly ask, you know, if while we were doing this, somebody walked in and said, hey, by the way, don't touch that out in the hallway, you're going to get sick if you touch it. We probably would say, we know this is live, but let's find out what he's talking about, because I don't know. Well, when you see something and you don't know what it means, you find out what it means. And to go back to that concept of a lifeguard, I in the back of my head, I have this concept that I've taken it a step further called a life guardian.
Life guardian, that's good.
Again, because the analogy of a lifeguard is so perfect. If you're flopping around, joking around, like I have 3 kids, we just spent a week in Florida with our in-laws. So we don't have a pool here, but they had a pool there to play with at 80-degree water, you know. So my son, having, you know, this huge pool, he did everything you possibly could do in a week. He did dives, he did flips. At one point, he's just seeing how his body floats. I don't know while he's floating there if he's in distress or if he's just experiencing buoyancy for the first time. So I need to find out. I can't just assume it's one way or the other. So, you know, a lifeguard is sitting there. There's other lifeguards on the beach. You're not doing this alone. Like you said, sometimes you don't know, so you have to. You might have the skill to reach out yourself and have that conversation. If you don't have that skill, then you have to get that person to someone who does. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, whether you're using it for yourself or you're using it for another person, it's 1-800-273-8255. And again, sometimes we take that information because we know we'll help somebody else, but you may not need it right now. But again, at some point you may be experiencing some type of distress. I want to give it again. It's 1-800-273-8255. Here on Long Island, we have 2 crisis centers that work with that line. It is a lifeline. Sometimes people will say to us, I'm not in a crisis. I don't need a crisis center. I don't need a crisis line. That National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is just that. It's a lifeline. So if you're alive and you're struggling with anything, you can call that number.
We'll put it up again at the end of the show. Yeah.
And as well, when the person is constantly saying, you know, I want to kill myself, I want to die, it's not when they're constantly saying it that there's a real danger, but rather when they stop saying it.
Well, so we know that there's a danger actually, that's somewhat a myth. We know that there's a danger in all 3 sections. There's a danger before you hear it, there's a danger when you hear it, and there's a danger after you stop hearing it. So if you don't hear it, there might be signs and signals, and they don't, you know, one of the things that we see is that sometimes a person is isolated or they're alone, they feel alone. And when you're isolated and alone, sometimes you don't have great communication skills. So sometimes it's hard for you to articulate what you're feeling, which is why like post-tour processing allows us to facilitate a conversation. We're not called peer support officers, we're called peer facilitators, because with that program, our goal, our skill is not to be mental health professionals, but to facilitate a conversation. So when you have someone who doesn't have great communication skills, they might not find the words. When you hear someone
they
talking
might be
about
the strong
suicide,
silent type too, as a lot of police officers tend to be.
The stigma is when you have a problem, you call us. If I have a problem, I'm not supposed to talk about it because I'm the problem solver. To go back to what you were saying, you know, sometimes people will feel like if they're talking about it openly, they're probably less of a risk or they're probably not as serious. But we know that sometimes a person might be so close to thinking about suicide and suiciding that the part of them that wants to live says, this is it. I'm just the example I like to use is, you know, I was shy as a kid and we used to have, you know, school dances. And for the entire dance, I would sit with my back against the wall. I was so afraid. I still don't know how to dance. Don't ask me.
A lot of guys don't.
I would sit with my back against the wall and I'd be so nervous because I don't know how to dance and I don't know how to talk to a girl and I don't know how to approach her. And what would happen is I'd hear the DJ say, okay guys, this is the last dance of the night. And then I'd say, oh my gosh, I have to do something because this is my last chance. So then I would go running around trying to ask, and every time I asked, I found somebody who would say, yeah, I'll dance with you.
It was the last chance for them too.
It was the last chance. So you might have somebody who's going around giving out these signs, these invitations to people, family members, friends, co-workers, complete strangers. And no one is answering that invitation. So then they get to the point where they're actually willing to talk about it because the part of them that wants to live wants some type of help, and trying to be, by giving out the invitations and showing the signs and signals, that wasn't working. Well, the part of me knows how close I am to maybe thinking about really ending my life. So this is it. I'm going to start talking about it. So if someone that you love or yourself, you're experiencing to the point where they're actually openly discussing it, we treat that as if there's just as much risk as if they just stopped talking about it. They just started talking about it. We know that sometimes people are walking around with these feelings for days, for weeks. I spoke to one person who said that for 17 years of her life, she had thoughts of suicide.
Wow.
She had never told anybody.
Had anybody in a family committed suicide? Because that's a good precursor that the person might be more likely to do it.
That is one of the things that we'll look at too for risk assessment.
Yeah, 17 years is a long time. I mean, that, nowadays they do have medication. It's the kind of medication that doesn't turn you into a zombie. You can still function, and there's no shame in getting on medication any more than there'd be a shame in getting on medication if you were diabetic or had high blood pressure or anything else. But I think one of the concerns, I don't know if this is still the truth, is that for a police officer, they're afraid that if they get on antidepressants or anti-anxiety, any kind of medication, even the mild versions that they have out today, that their gun will be taken away. And once their gun is taken away, they can't perform a good portion of their duties. What is the stand on that?
So what I'll say is it's more than just that. We have police officers and law enforcement who are afraid to even just mention that they're struggling with something, because they're afraid their guns are going to be taken away.
Okay,
so
all right.
I'd gone to a seminar a couple of years ago given by a police psychologist, and he had said, there's 400, 500 people maybe in this room, and he said, and it was really funny actually, because I remember sitting there going, wow, he's spending a lot of time doing this. He said, raise your hand if you have 2 years on, raise your hand if you have 5 years on, raise your hand if you have 10 years on, and little by little, parts of the crowd raised their hand. So he looked at it, and he had this gentleman sitting next to him with a clipboard, and he added it all up. He said, okay, so with the 400 people in this room, there's about 3,000 years of experience of law enforcement. So we're like, okay, that's great. You can do math.
Among you, yeah.
So he said, now let me ask you the important question. Out of the 3,000 years of experience that we have here, has anybody in this room ever heard of a police officer who said, I'm struggling, I need help, and they lost their job or they didn't get help? So we all sat there and were kind of looking around, because most of us did peer support, and he said, it is a stigma about asking for help. Not a single person raised their hand, and I've never, if you had bronchitis, or if you while coming up here broke your ankle and said, oh, I want to keep this a secret, there'd be enough people that said, look, the bone's sticking out. I know you want to keep it a secret, but it's affecting your livelihood, and it's affecting your ability to do your job, and we can tell you that you're struggling. So most of the time, the fear that we find, whether it's regular civilians or it's law enforcement, about reaching out for help is either misplaced because, I've taken medication before.
They don't want to be put away.
They don't want to lose their
quote
job.
Unquote, they don't want to lose their job.
They don't want to be judged.
They don't want to be judged. It's true. I think, though, you could say I need help, say, with my family. I need help with, something minor with a supervisor, even if it's a problem on the job. But if you say something like, I'm depressed, I'm thinking of suicide, might they not then temporarily take the gun away? But that doesn't mean they don't give it back within a very short period of time.
So that's one of the things that we look at. We wouldn't want somebody who's thinking about suicide to be left alone or to be left with the gun. So one of the things that might happen is the gun might be removed, but
temporarily.
It's as with anything else. You can be ill and then recover and get better. So just because you're struggling with something, and again, thinking about the things that we see in law enforcement or the firefighters or EMS, I mean, they're pretty atrocious. So when we talk about secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, no wonder, no one is supposed to see these things and be okay. So many times I'll hear a regular person or law enforcement say to me, oh, you're the peer support guy. Yeah, I'm one of the guys on the team. We have a whole team. I'm just one little cog in the machine. And they'll say, I'm okay. That's the start of the conversation. I'm fine. And then I say, well, what are you fine about? And then they give me the most atrocious story in the world. And a lot of what I say and a lot of what I do, I've stolen from lots of people. I'm very, very smart people that have trained me or that I teach with.
Well, nothing is said that's never been said before. Yeah, so
one of the things that I heard though was, in particular, let's say you saw, there was a car accident and a family's on fire. You're not supposed to be okay seeing that. So if you say, this is what I saw, but I'm okay, that's really not okay. You're not supposed, if you feel like the love of your life, who you were supposed to take care of and they were supposed to take care of you, has now left you, or you have no purpose in life, or you're never going to be happy again, but you're okay. You're not supposed to be okay after things like that.
Exactly.
That's why we find somebody who's a mental health professional to kind of help us sort through those thoughts and those emotions and those behaviors.
Well, most of the police that come for therapy, I mean, they can stay on the job and keep working even though they're going through a divorce or something else is going on. But I know that for things like a bad fire, maybe 9/11 was different because it was such a catastrophic event, but they have a debriefing that is about 10 minutes of talking to the group.
Yes.
And then it's like, you okay?
Yeah. So
and it doesn't do it.
In most places, even organizations, whether it's sometimes it's schools or it's a business or it's around crisis, sometimes when we go into a location, we'll ask about a policy or what their procedure is or their guidelines. And sometimes we'll hear that there is none, which obviously that's not great. You should have some type of guidelines.
Yeah.
But sometimes the guideline is simply like, we're going to do this. And we'll, in a very non-judgmental way, we're not there to critique anybody. We'll simply ask, based on the knowledge that we have and best practices, can we ask why we're doing it this way? And the answer is usually, well, because we had nothing before that, so at least we're doing something. But when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about life and death, just doing something is not always great. It has to be done the right way, which is why the Suicide Prevention Center of New York, the Suicide Prevention Resource Center, the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Long Island, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, there's all of these organizations. Like you said, there's nothing that's never been said before that we can't say again. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. If somebody was watching this and they were thinking, oh, we should do something with our organization regarding suicide prevention, then you don't have to invent it yourself. If you have a mental health professional on call, you can utilize their skills, but there are toolkits, there are programs, there are people already out there who have been trained in what the evidence-based best practices are. So you don't have to, and certainly if you're struggling, one of the things I like to say is, there's so many people, there's so many things we could be doing right now. The fact that someone is watching this, even if it's not live and it's after the fact, let's say on YouTube or Facebook, there's a reason that someone might be sitting here watching this now. I know sometimes people will say to me, I was looking for a sign. Well, we're here now and you're here watching this. This could be the sign. So if there's any part of a person that's watching this and they're thinking to themselves, maybe now might be the time I reach out for help, this is the most perfect time for you to reach out for help. There's a reason, I believe, for everything. So in regards to policy, and sometimes just doing what everybody else has done in the past is not always the best. You really need to know what you're doing and have a plan. Failing to plan is a plan to fail. So sometimes people say, oh, we don't say the word suicide because that creates a liability. Well, not saying the word suicide might create the liability. So certainly if you see someone struggling, like I said, that concept of being a life guardian, you're sitting in your chair. I know that if I see something, I'll check it out. I know that I'm not alone. I know I have a certain amount of skills. I know that I'm not going to be here forever. I know that if I have a really intense save, that I can have people next to me that I can talk to. I have a supervisor that'll probably check in with me.
You have a good support system.
I develop myself.
Yeah.
I don't, you don't usually see a 600-pound lifeguard sitting in the chair. You have to maintain a certain amount of skills, and it's the same thing I think that everybody in the community can do. Take a course in the most basic suicide prevention. There's a program called Safe Talk, which is 3 hours. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has a whole bunch of different programs. There's an actual program that teaches you how to have a conversation and do an actual intervention, even as a non-mental health professional, called ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. But as a non-mental health professional, I always include a mental health professional. Like I said, my wife one time called me over and she said, "Hey, the toilet's not working." So I said, "Okay," and she's like, "No, come over here and look." So I walk over to it and I kick it like a caveman, and I'm like, "It's still not working." And then I looked at her and I'm like, "Oh, I see." I could tell on her face she thought I was going to fix it. I'm not a plumber.
Well, you're a man, aren't you?
Well, I will say I watched a YouTube video and I learned that it was a wax ring underneath. So I actually fixed that toilet.
Now this is very generational, because clearly I'm quite a bit older than you.
Yeah.
You grew up as a guy. You had to know how to use the plunger. You had to know how to fix stuff around the house.
Plunger.
You had to know how to fix the car.
Yeah.
And no one knows how to do anything anymore.
But so what I'm going to say though is, like, I joke about watching that YouTube video, and I was very proud of myself because I never fixed the wax ring on a toilet before. But the point was,
but the wax ring is for a leak, not a clog.
Yeah, it was leaking.
Oh,
it wasn't just clogging. Yes. No, the whole.
Okay.
There's water. So, but the thing though is, I would never watch a YouTube video and try to learn suicide prevention. So you have to do more than just think that I can read a book or I can watch a movie. And it's the same thing. I recently I had the opportunity to take a training in hostage negotiation, and when I came back, I was really proud of it because I'm not a hostage negotiator, but I saw that there was a parallel to some of the suicide prevention work I was doing. When I got back, everybody who's ever seen a movie about hostage negotiation said, "Oh, I know how to do that stuff," and they started saying all these things from a movie, and I said, "Wow, if we put you anywhere near one of these situations, it would be very dangerous. It would actually cause more danger." So we have people who will say, they'll find somebody who's thinking about suicide, and they'll say, like, they'll use fear. So they'll say something like, you're not really going to die, you could just be really injured. Or they'll use guilt, and they'll say, like, well, don't you have a family? Don't you love them? If you kill yourself, who's going to take care of your kids? And the reason that they're saying that is because they're so scared about this person killing themselves that they're willing to say anything to stop them. But we know it's not helpful.
Also, if you come to the wrong person, sometimes you come to somebody and they don't know how to deal with it. But now they feel like, okay, you got it off your mind. Now it's on my mind. And I have to do something. Yeah. And what they do is the wrong thing. So if you don't know what to do, your responsibility then is to ask something else. And with Google and YouTube and everything else available today, it should be easy enough to find a legitimate resource that the person can go to.
Do you know what I've done when I was reasonably certain that person was dead serious about doing it?
What happened?
Call 911. Yeah. Let them hate me. I'm not trained at this. Call 911. Let them get picked up. Let them get hospitalized, evaluated, medicated. Let them hate my guts forever. Yeah. But I know I did the right thing.
You did. The police won't necessarily pick them up, arrest them, hospitalize them, anything else.
No, I'm giving the extreme.
Yeah. I'm saying, but they have to know that the police won't necessarily do that. They'll talk to them, and if the person sounds okay, then a lot of times they won't do anything.
Yeah.
But you are doing the appropriate thing by calling 911 so that it's not on your mind and your conscience.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's not defensive to not have it on my conscience.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it on that. I'm doing it because, right now, I'm assessing this person as serious with the intent to do it now. Mm-hmm. When I don't have that and I've been concerned, but it doesn't sound imminent, I've been like, "Oh God, you got to do me a favor. I'm drunk as a skunk. I can't get out of the house. You got to pick up a pack of cigarettes and bring it to me."
So what?
Or something of that nature. They get to my house and they're like, "You're sober."
Yeah.
But just take it from there. And because sometimes just on the phone from the distance, with or without training, you can't be sure unless the affirmative words are said of "I am going to do X, Y, and Z now," and that's when I'll call 911. Yeah. I won't try to talk them out of it. Well, I call 911 because what I say to talk them out of it may actually reinforce it. I know that.
Well, the number I gave before is a great resource for that reason, because you can actually conference call in a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and then somebody who's trained can listen to what's being said. But again, we always err on the side of caution. So calling 911 because you know this person is going to kill him, it is a crisis situation. 911 is there for crisis situations. So, but again, what it comes down to is really, like you were saying, knowing what resources are there. So people who don't know what resources are there, they need to take some time, especially if you're worried about someone. If you're so worried about someone that you think that you might have to talk about suicide, then take the time to learn about what suicide means. In my occasion, because I do pay attention, I often see signs everywhere I go because I'm trained to notice things. So when you do get trained, you'll be surprised to know that 1 out of 20 people are usually having some type of ideation that suicide's an option. Not that 1 out of 20 people are going to kill themselves, but certainly 1 out of 20 people are having the thought that suicide is an option. When I say that 1 out of 20 people, that's 5% of the population. Yeah. If I were to say 1 out of 20 people are going to punch you in the nose today, imagine what your day would be like. You'd be walking around really paying attention. Yeah. So I'm not telling anybody that I don't want anybody to burn out trying to look for signs, but the fact is, taking a class and learning those skills are going to be important, because I can almost guarantee you that someone in your life, someone that you care about, at some point is going to be thinking that suicide's an option.
And also earlier, Dr. Jean brought up about medications. I know from a psychiatrist that gave a program that I attended, he spoke about people that are being medicated for both bipolar depression and anxiety, and he said often once the anxiety is relieved with the medication, that's when they'll first actually try a suicide, because the anxiety they were suffering was actually stopping them from actually attempting it.
Yeah, so one of the things that we look at is, we were talking about means restriction before, taking away the means. This would be another concept of comorbidity. Comorbidity or co-occurring disorders are when one or more mental health disorder occurs at the same time. So what's really important is that when you find that mental health professional, you find someone who knows how to deal with all of the facets of what's going on. So you could, again, I take the analogy of a car. You could bring a car to a mechanic and the mechanic can work on it, but there are some really high-end, expensive cars that you don't just take that car to anybody. You have to specifically go to somebody who knows what they're doing. So when we talk about medication and mental health disorders, we're looking to find a mental health resource that can understand and see everything that you're doing there. So
exactly, and sometimes, Mace brought up a good point. Sometimes it does happen that somebody is so depressed, they have so little energy, they're sleeping all day, and then suddenly they get a little more energy, they get livelier. That can be a dangerous time for suicide, because that's more energy to go out and do something. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in that lethargic state for life, but sometimes there are certain times, they say, often people can commit suicide when they're getting better. Yes. So when you see a sign that somebody is changing in any way, that might be a sign that you have to look out for them a little bit more closely than before.
We got to start winding down.
Okay.
So, if we can give our closing statements, and if you want to give a shout out to anyone.
Sure. Well, again, so for me, and again, I really do mean it, whether it's my brother or the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, the Suicide Prevention Coalition, or the Tulips that I work with, I feel very, very lucky all the time to be with these groups. There are people who give of themselves so much that you could probably call them at 3 a.m. after them not sleeping all day, and they'll come out to help you. So the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is afsp.org here on Long Island, and Morrison is the area director. She does a wonderful job for Long Island. For the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Long Island, we have the Mental Health Association as a part of it, the Association for Mental Health and Wellness, the Yes Counseling Center. I mean, there's so many different individuals. I help co-chair with a woman by the name of Meryl Cassidy. She also runs the Response, which is the crisis center for Suffolk County. Our brand new website, if you want to go on, it's preventsuicideli.org. It's very similar to preventsuicideny.org, which is the Suicide Prevention Center of New York. And again, for me, with the law enforcement, the SBA, which is the the PBA, which is the Police Benevolent Association, gave me the great opportunity of coordinating a peer support team for Suffolk County. We have that opportunity locally, PAPA in New York City with the NYPD, and then now with the post-tort processing, it's TTNY.org. ttmpt.org or ttmpt.com. If you go to ttmpt.com, there's more information. If you work with or you're law enforcement, there's more information about post-tour processing. Regardless of what resource you use, you're not alone. There's support out there. It's just a matter of finding it.
And folks, don't forget, we're going to be broadcasting Long Island Talk. Let's get lit together every Sunday night right here on WLINY at 7 p.m. every Sunday. Next Sunday, we're going to be having David Tillery discussing race and politics. It should be a really interesting, lively, and entertaining presentation. Dr. Jean, anything you want to announce?
We're going to be having Timothy Whitcomb talking about a situation that he observed where a high-level police person really went berserk, and because he wasn't being helped and wound up murdering somebody or attempting a murder.
2 weeks from today, right?
That's 2 weeks from today.
I know Sheriff Whitcomb. He's an he's one of those superheroes.
Yes,
Sheriff Timothy Whitcomb is part of different programs. He's also part of Post Tour. An amazing speaker. Tune in. You're absolutely going to love Sheriff Whitcomb's conversation.
Phil Schoppman, I want to thank you very much for coming on today. I hope you've helped people out in the audience.
Thank you. You can take the banana.
Dr. Jean, anyone you want to give a shout out to or say thank you to?
No, well, to Robin Canariato, certainly for suggesting this guy. What about your twin brother?
Yes, my twin brother. Because we're law enforcement, we don't usually give out names, but I will say that my twin brother, he knows who he is. But and if you know him, then you know what kind of guy he is. So again, there's so many wonderful police officers and peer support officers just looking out for each other, and that's all this is looking out for each other.
And say that number again to call for suicide prevention.
1-800-273-8255.
And I want to thank you again, even though we're not sure if you're you or your twin brother.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, have a great Sunday night. Stay dry, stay warm, stay safe. We love you.
In other news, I just wanted to mention we also have Ty Vicari, her talk on Thursdays, and Finding Common Ground on Fridays. Thank you guys. Have a nice night.